Great. Okay, so we are still studying the Amidah. I think you're going to find today an exciting topic of sleuthing. We're looking at the middle section of prayers, the bakashot, or the petitionary requests. Right, we're asking for things from God, and so let's start. We're going to jump in. We're going to be looking at some rabbinic texts that we've already looked at. We're going to look at it in a different way, though. All right, and so just for a brief review for time periods. Right. So when we talk about the Mishnah, we're talking about the first kind of layer of what's called the Oral Torah, written in the late 2nd century, representing material that has been compiled since the first decade after the destruction of the Second Temple, and then going for about 6 generations worth of rabbis. Rabban Gamliel is the first major figure who is the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, of the kind of the recompiled group of rabbis who made it out of Jerusalem, and they enact a number of reforms that are necessary given the tragedy that has just taken place. So we have this Mishnah that in which Rabban Gamliel appears. So it begins, Rabban Gamliel Omer, B'chol Yom, Mitpalel Adam Shmone Esrei. Every day, a person must pray 18. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Me'ein Shmone Esrei. So Rabbi Yehoshua, who is a colleague of Rabban Gamliel, same era, he says an abstract of the 18, right? Something like the 18. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Im shkurat filato befiv yipalel shmona esrei, v'im lav me'ein shmona esrei. Rabbi Akiva, who is a couple generations later, Rabbi Akiva dies in 135 of the Common Era. So he's probably a young boy at the time of Rabban Gamliel's pronouncement. So Rabbi Akiva says, if his Tefilah is fluent in his mouth, he should pray the 18, and if not, an abstract of the 18. All right. So when we say 18, what are we talking about?
Eighteen blessings.
18 blessings, right? Where, this comes in the Mishnah in the context of describing the obligation for Tefilah. And so we've got 18 blessings or 18 themes. And, I can't reiterate enough that they do not have Siddurim. The vast majority of people, probably about 96% of the Roman Empire, and there's no reason to think that the Jews, as a whole, this is not also true of them, but 96% illiteracy. The top classes are literate. The rabbis, probably some of them are literate, not necessarily all of them, right? So when they talk about the oral Torah, Torah shebe'al peh, they mean it, right? They mean oral Torah. So much of this is being memorized. And so when a rabbi is, let's say, referring to, citing some other source or something like that, they're doing it from memory more often than not. I read recently that if they had wanted to actually print a Siddur in the 2nd century, they would not have had, paper didn't exist. So it would have taken parchment, right? And that's when I saw something like 130 or 40, this seems like an exaggeration, but goat or sheep's skins in order to publish the Siddur. That seems a little high to me, but just the cost would have been enormous. So when we're talking about 18 blessings, the question is, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a fixed prayer? Or are we talking about themes that you've got to hit, right? When Rabbi Yehoshua, in the same generation as Rabban Gamliel, says you don't need to pray all 18, you need to pray an abstract, not 18 separate blessings, but maybe a single blessing that covers all 18 topics in it, right? So that's much shorter. So then the focus seems to be more on the topics than on the particular words that we're discussing. All right, so that was the Mishnah. The Talmud then begins. Hane tamnesre, shasre havyan, right? Are these 18? There are 19, right? What do you mean 18 blessings? We got 19 blessings, right? So how do we make sense of 19 blessings when Mishnah says 18, and here we have in Babylonia, the Babylonian Talmud, keep in mind, we've got 19. So, Amar Rabbi Levi, Birkat Minim B'Yavne Tiknua. Rabbi Levi says, the blessing of the heretics, they instituted it in Yavne. Keneged mi tiknuha, corresponding to what was it instituted? Amar Rabbi Levi, LeRabbi Hillel Bred Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Keneged El Hakavod Hirim. All right, so we're gonna see this reference a little bit later, but Rabbi Levi says that, well, according to Rabbi Hillel, the son of Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, it corresponds to the phrase El Hakavod Hirim. Right, so this is Psalm 29. This is the Psalm for Shabbat. Is that right? Yes, it's the Psalm, no, not a Psalm for Shabbat. This is the Habu Adonai B'nai Elim. Right, so this is part of Kabbalat Shabbat. It's the psalm we sing right before L'chad Odi. So it says that it corresponds to this particular phrase, El HaKavod Hirim. So what are we talking about? So in that psalm, it turns out there are 18 mentionings of God's name, Yud He Vav He. Yud He Vav He appears 18. And now what he's doing is he's pulling out this additional phrase, El HaKavod Hirim, which is not Yud He Vav He, but he's saying this one corresponds to the 19th blessing of the Amidah. All right, fine. The Rabbi Yosef has a different answer. Keneged Echad Shebekriyat Shema. He says it corresponds to the word Echad in Kriyat Shema. So he does something similar. He looks at the Shema and he counts up the mentionings of God's name, Yud He Vav He, and he comes to 18. Okay, that's nice. Echad, that one in the first line, that's the 19th, he says. And then we have Rabbi Tanchum Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Keneged Chuya Ktana Shebeshidra. So Rabbi Tanchum says in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, it corresponds to the small little vertebra at the bottom of the spine. So apparently there are 18 vertebrae in the spine, plus this little 19th one at the bottom. So I don't know, how many vertebrae are actually in the spine? Anybody know? I'm not sure. We'll have to count. Okay, so this is the Babylonian Talmud. So what do we, 18 blessings, they say, well, what do you mean 18? There's 19. What's the 19th blessing? They identify it as the blessing of the Minim, of the heretics. And now we give three different midrashic answers as to how we get to 19. And the assumption being that there is a reason, some sort of literary reason for having 18 blessings in the first place. And so if that's the case, if we have 18 from a literary perspective, we need to find some sort of justification to add a 19th blessing. All right, that's this discussion here. Now, the blessing of the heretics. What is the blessing of the heretics? So if you are in Siddur Sim Shalom for weekdays, you can go to page 39. If you have the Shabbat version, you'll be able to find it, let's see, on page 6 in the Shabbat version. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on it right now. We will spend time on it, just not right now. I'm just going to read the English. Frustrate the hopes of all those who malign us. Let all evil soon disappear. Let all your enemies soon be destroyed. May you quickly uproot and crush the arrogant. May you subdue and humble them in our time. Praised are you, Adonai, who humbles the arrogant. Okay, so basically, schmeist our enemies, God, right? So here we have the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, identifying the 19th blessing as a blessing in which we're calling upon God to just defeat God's enemies.
I don't see minim in that blessing.
Ah, that's an okay. The malshinim are the whisperers, right? So those who inform against us. Yeah. The word minim does not appear in this. And yet this is referred to as birkat minim. That's really, a min is a sectarian, right? So we're not talking about just enemies per se. We're talking about unkosher Jews, essentially, right? So, all right, let's
La malshinim in Hebrew, it's somebody who is telling about others.
Yeah, it's an informant.
Right.
An informant, yeah. Okay, so let's look at these middle blessings, these bakashot. And let's just look at the order. First, we have knowledge. We pray for knowledge. And then we pray to God for repentance. And then we ask for forgiveness. And then redemption, healing, physical healing, years, birkat hashanim, and this is it's called the blessing of years, but it's asking for basically the right rain at the right season in order to have a bounteous crop. And then the gathering of the exiles, and then we ask for justice, and then we ask God the birkat minim, the blessing of the heretics. And then kind of corresponding to that one, we have the blessing for the righteous, where we're asking God to bless the righteous and to enable them to prosper. It's kind of the inverse of the heretics blessing. Then Jerusalem, we want God to rebuild Jerusalem. And then David, which is restoring a descendant of David to the throne as the Mashiach, as the Messiah. And then finally, Shomea Tefilah, we ask God to hear our prayer. So this is 13 blessings altogether. If you remove the heretics, we would have 12 blessings. And these together comprise what are called the bakashot. A bakasha is levakesh is to request something or to petition for something. So these are the petitionary blessings. All of them are in the first person plural. So it's all we. We ask for them not for me, but for all of us, for all of the Jewish people.
Rabbi, are the first three around? We're starting with 4 and going.
Yes, this is the central section of blessings. So we'll come back to the first 3 and the last 3, right? But there's 3 at the beginning and 3 at the end, which are part of every single Amidah on weekdays or on Shabbat or festivals. The ones in the middle change. So on a weekday service, these are the blessings that comprise the middle section of the Amidah, the 13 bakashot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now this is a continuation of the passage from the Babylonian Talmud where we were asking 18 blessings, but I thought there were 19 blessings. Where do those come from? And then they identify as birkat minim, the blessing of the heretics, as the 19th blessing that was added on. Okay, so now the Gemara launches in. Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught. This expression, Tanu Rabbanan, introduces a Braita, right? A Braita, 2nd century text from the land of Israel, ostensibly, so it's kind of coterminous from the Mishnah, same time period, same figures generally as appear in the Mishnah, but not in the Mishnah, right? So this is non-Mishnaic material. But of course, when the Babylonian Talmud cites it, we're talking about a text that's from Babylonia from several hundred years later. And so there's always a question about the accuracy of any given text that appears in the Babylonian Talmud. So, but here we go. We have a Braita. Shimon Apakuli, Hisdir Shmona Esrei Brachot Lifnei Rabban Gamliel Al Haseder Beyavna. We saw this text. Shimon the Pakuli, which is like the flax maker or something like the flax gatherer, arranged the 18 blessings before Rabban Gamliel in order in Yavne. Now, I want to point out a couple of things. Hisdir, he ordered them, right? He placed them in order. He arranged them. So that's different than he gave testimony to them or he composed them, right? It's he arranged them, put them in a particular order. Right. So, Amar lehem Rabban Gamliel chachamim. Then Rabban Gamliel said to the sages, Klum yesh adam sheodeh letakein birkat haminim. Is there any person who knows to institute the blessing of the heretics, right? And here the word he's asking for is litakein, really to fix, right? Same as tikkun olam, right? The fixing of the world, but litakein is to issue an edict. So here we're talking about introducing something new, right? Not ordering material which possibly already exists, but to come up with something new. Amad Shmuel HaKatan v'tikna. So Shmuel the Katan, Shmuel the lesser, or the little, or the young, he stood up, v'tikna, and he instituted it. L'shana acheret, shchacha. So the next year, or maybe another year, a later year, shchacha, he forgot it. V'hishkif ba'shtayim v'shalosh sha'ot v'lo he'eluhu, right? And so he forgot, he was serving as the shaliach tzibur. He was praying. He gets to the point where he's supposed to include the birkat haminim, and then he forgets it. And then he spends, it says 2 or 3 hours. He spends 2 or 3 hours. He just stops in the middle of his prayer. He spends 2 or 3 hours just not saying anything. Like maybe he's trying to remember it or something like that. V'la ha'eluhu, and they did not remove him from, like they didn't fire him from the job. Okay. Oh, this is strange. So this is the Braita that we've got. Now we have the Gemara coming in. Amai lo ha'eluhu. So now we're done quoting this story. And now these sages in Babylonia are now going to try and figure it out. They're going to try and explain it. So why didn't they remove him? The ha'amar Rav Yehuda Marav. Didn't Rav Yehuda say in the name of Rav? Ta'a b'chol brachot kulan ein malinoto b'virkat minim malinoto. Right. So we have this teaching from Rav. Right. Rav is a Babylonian sage, an Amora. Rav said that if a person is leading services, we got the shaliach tzibur, and he made a mistake in any of the blessings, any of the 18 blessings, ein ma'alinoto, we don't remove him, right? He gets to keep his job, right? If he left one out, it's okay, right? People make mistakes. B'virkat haminim, but if the mistake he made, the one he left out was the birkat haminim, the blessing against the heretics, then we remove him. Right? Chayshinan shema minhu, because we suspect that perhaps he himself is a heretic, right? So what other reason would a person have for not calling upon God to shmeiss the heretic than that person himself is a heretic, right? So we got that. You got to say that one, otherwise we suspect you, right? So we have this ruling, so from Rav, and so what the Gemara has done, and the Gemara is often a synthetic document. In other words, we're taking different material from different places and putting them together, right? So this discussion didn't necessarily happen, probably didn't happen in this exact order, but somebody compiled these different sources and created a conversation. So the conversation began with citing this story about Shmuel HaKatan, who, composed this Birkat HaMinim, and then the next year he seemed to forget it, and he just stood there trying to remember it, and they didn't remove him. And then we had this other discussion where Rav says if somebody screws up the Birkat HaMinim or leaves it out, then you can't leave them up there. You have to remove them. That could be a heretic. So then the Gemara answers it. Shane Shmuel HaKatan de'ihu takna. Shmuel HaKatan is different because he's the one who instituted, right? We don't suspect him. He's the author, right? You can't suspect him of being a heretic. He's the one who composed the prayer in the first place, right? It's a simple, he just forgot it. That's all there is to it, right? All right, so the 19th blessing. Have we answered the question about how the 19th blessing came into being? If you were going to kind of create, based on the material we've looked at, if you were going to create a story to describe the move from 18 blessings to 19 blessings, what would that story be?
Well, there used to be 12 bevakashot that have an earlier origin, perhaps in the temple era. And then Shimon Apakuli comes in and arranges them and perhaps anthologizes them, but doesn't write anything new. And then Shmuel HaKatan adds this extra blessing about heretics and sectarians because that is timely for people who have witnessed the destruction of the temple.
Okay, all right. So that's the explanation. And that is the explanation that has served the Jewish people for about 1,800 years, right? So we've got this is the order, right? We've got these 13 blessings. Now, why don't we say the bakashot on Shabbat?
On Shabbat, you're not supposed to ask things.
All right, yeah. God gets a break also, right? We don't ask God to do things for us on Shabbat. All right, so let's look at what were those opening blessings that we saw. And I can see I'm need to make myself a little smaller. There we go. Okay, so our opening blessings, we studied these, right? We start with we invoke God's covenant with our ancestors. That's the avot. And then we talk about gvurot, God's power or mighty acts. And then we talk about kedusha, the holiness of God's name. Then we get the middle section, our 13 petitionary blessings. And then we get the concluding blessing, 3 blessings. We haven't studied these in detail yet, but 17, 18, and 19. 17 is avodah, where we're asking God to restore worship in the temple. And then there's hoda'ah, so like a modim, where you give thanks to God. And then finally, birkat shalom, prayer for peace. We ask God to bring peace. All right, what's the problem here?
Excuse me, if we're not supposed to ask for anything on Shabbat, how come we ask for people to be healed and all that stuff?
Well, okay, so, right, so the petitionary blessings are weekday only, right? So number 4 through 16, these are only on weekdays. On Shabbat, we substitute something else in this middle section, right? It's we substitute a single blessing. It's Mekadesh Shabbat. God sanctifies the Sabbath day. So we're not asking God for things. Problem: restore worship in the temple, bring peace. Those sound a whole lot like bakashot, right? We're asking God to do these things. How are these any different than 4 through 16? And yet we say both of these, we include both of these blessings on Shabbat. So this story, and this is the story for the last 1,800 years, is that we're giving God a break on Shabbat. It just doesn't hold up when we actually look at the blessings. Of course, we're asking for God for things on Shabbat. So that explanation doesn't seem to fit with the prayers that we actually have in front of us.
But don't we ask God to heal the sick on Shabbat? You say the names.
Yes. So we have, so if you look here in the petition, number 8, that's, let's see, in the Siddur, it's, Rafa'inu Adonai b'nei Rafeh. Heal us, Lord, that we may be healed. And then it ends, Baruch atah Hashem, Rofei Cholei Amo Yisrael. Blessed are you, Lord, who heals the sick of his people Israel, right? Now that's different than the Mishaberach that we chant during the Torah service. There's no bracha in the Mishaberach. Of course, we are asking God to bring healing. So yes, you're right. Our prayers are, we in fact don't give God a break on Shabbat, despite what that explanation may be suggesting. Okay, so in the...
Actually, sorry, Rabbi.
Yes.
So is that because, I mean, is there any sort of explanation that that's because it's more of a life and death situation, so therefore it's an exception on Shabbat?
No, if that was the case, then the one that's in the middle of the Amidah, we should include that also.
Okay.
Yeah. So in the 19th century, as Jews started to kind of through the Enlightenment, started to enter into the academies, we started to study our own history. And so you had these scholars, kind of the first Jewish historians and people who were looking at our texts from a more academic, a more critical perspective. And one of the great thinkers in the 19th century was Leopold Zunz. And he noticed that this particular blessing, the Amidah, it didn't make sense that this explanation, it just didn't make sense that we're giving God a break. So maybe there's a different thing going on here. And so he looked at these 13 middle blessings and he wanted to see, well, maybe there's a story that these blessings are telling. And so one thing he looked at and he noticed is who is the intended object of each of these blessings, right? Who is it for? So look at the beginning: knowledge, repentance, and forgiveness, redemption, and healing. These are all personal, right? These are all things that I would pray for, presumably for myself even, right? Even though it's plural, first person plural, like if I'm going to pray for knowledge and the ability to ask for forgiveness and then to be forgiven, right? These are really personal in nature. At least that's how he categorized them. And then what's next? Years, right? So this is asking for rain on the land so that the land is prosperous. Well, that's not just for an individual person, that's for the entire people. The gathering the exiles, justice, schmeiss the heretics, reward the righteous, restore Jerusalem, enthrone David's descendant, right? These are national. And what's the last one? Shomea Tefilah, hear our prayer. Again, we come back to the personal. And so he starts to see a different story that might be told here. And then he started to speculate as to how the Amidah came to be in the way that it is. Because we've seen this, that there's a gradual development in terms of what people are praying and the gradual coming together of some sort of a liturgy. And what he speculated was that the first three and the last three blessings of the Amidah, so not the Bakashot, represent an earlier phase of the development of the Amidah. And so in Second Temple times, maybe even in early Second Temple times, already these were themes that were being used as prayers by Jews. What comes next? Probably the personal, right? So, people are praying these kind of an understanding that there's certain themes we cover. So personal prayers then start to kind of find their way. Okay, well, I'll throw in something for knowledge, or I'll throw in something for healing. And then the national prayers come in to respond to particular national issues. And those he identifies as being later, during kind of the later, phases of the Second Temple. And you can imagine, what's going on with the Romans kind of ruling things and picking favorites and clamping down on certain groups, and the rabbis being out of favor. And so you can imagine where some various blessings may begin to have meaning. And so then if we think about what Shimon Hapakuli does in terms of ordering the prayers. So what he's doing is he's taking all of these prayers, which are well known, and people are familiar with this kind of language, and he's creating some consistent order for all of these prayers. And so that's the story that Leopold Zunz begins to tell. And so he looks at maybe these personal prayers as being, let's say, more quote unquote original, and then the national prayers as being ones that have been added gradually, and until the point at which they are codified in some sort of order.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Doesn't redemption fall under both personal and national in terms of redemption from exile is a national redemption?
Well, it doesn't ask, it's not really, the language is not quite messianic. It's Re'ena v'onyenu, see us in our suffering, v'riva rivenu, kind of, wage our battle, wage our court cases, argue on behalf of us, uga'alenu me'era leman shemecha, redeem us quickly for your name's sake, ki goel chazak ata, because you are a powerful redeemer. This is a lot of the same language that we see in Psalms, where the psalmist is asking for God to come in and, schmeist his personal enemies. It's not asking, using the language of, let's say, gathering in the exiles, right? Or restoring Jerusalem or bringing in the Messiah, things like that, right? Those would be more national redemption. Although certainly these words are used in both contexts. And by the way, this is just what Sunz is noticing. He might not be right about this, but this is the story that he tells with these blessings.
In this story, the outermost six, three on either side, are the oldest. So does that mean that the prayer for restoration of sacrifices in the temple was written during the Babylonian exile rather than the Roman exile?
Unclear. Like I said, his story is not necessarily accurate. But he is starting to think critically, and he is starting to chip away at the classic story. And just to repeat, what is the classic story? The classic story is that after the Second Temple is destroyed, Rabban Gamliel comes in and basically has a project to lock down a liturgy, and they come up with these 18 blessings that they have brought together. And then soon after, he commissions a 19th blessing to be composed, and it is composed to deal with the issue of all of these sectarians. And that's how we have the Amidah that we have today. And the middle section with all of these bakashot, we don't say on Shabbat because God gets a break on Shabbat. Right? That's the story. So Sunz starts to chip away at that story. And then after Sunz died, a couple years after he died, the Cairo Geniza is uncovered. And the first thing that Salman Schechter publishes from the Cairo Geniza is a Siddur that is from the land of Israel. And here's the Amidah, right? And just from this distance, and we'll see a close-up in a moment, but you can see it's got vowels, right? So that tells us it's after the Masorah, after the Masoretes, so after the 9th century, and it's before the 11th century, or the mid-11th century. Right, so Schechter publishes in 1898. It was then analyzed in detail by Ismar Elbogen in 1924. And he was really the first really great scholar of Jewish liturgy. He wrote a book called Jewish Liturgy, A Comprehensive History by Ismar Elbogen. He's a German scholar. So he analyzes this as a young scholar in 1924. It's in 1096 CE, that's when the Crusaders come through the land of Israel and basically destroy the local Jewish community. So we can date this Siddur to prior to that. So now that's really interesting because we've got a Siddur written with all of the blessings in it. And wouldn't it be interesting to see what they've got for the Amidah? So there are 18 blessings, not 19. So that's interesting because now we know that at least this community of Jews living in the land of Israel, you know, they've got 18 blessings, just like Rabban Gamliel decreed. What else? It includes Birkat Haminim, the blessing against the heretics. So that's, what does this discovery do? Is it undermines the story that has existed for 1800 years. Because now what we've got is 18 blessings, not 19, and that 18 includes a blessing against heretics. So the story about the heretic blessing being added on afterwards is not supported by this evidence. So let's actually look at what the and it combines what the blessings for Jerusalem and the Messiah. So we're gonna look at that in detail. This is the blessing of the heretics. It starts on the bottom of the right side column, and this says La Mishumadim, right? And if you want to follow along in our Siddur on the bottom of 39, you're going to see differences. So ours has Vela Malshinim, right? Those who whisper, right? Those who turn people in. Mishumadim is a different word. Mishumadim means apostates, right? Heretics, right? Then we can't see this is a little bit hard to read, but it's been reconstructed. For the apostates, let there be no hope. So it's Lamashumadim al tihi tikva. And may the kingdom of the arrogant be quickly uprooted in our days. And may the Nazirim and the Minim instantly perish, right? So Max, you asked earlier about why is the word Minim not appear in this prayer, in the Birkat HaMinim? Well, it does appear. It just doesn't appear in the version that's in our Siddur. So what are Nazirim?
Aren't those the Nazirs that take on the vows?
No, they are the Nazarites, i.e. Christians. And the Christians and the sectarians, basically, instantly.
So these are not the Nazirim that we know of Samson.
No.
Okay.
No. May they be blotted from the book of the living and not be written with the righteous. And then, Baruch Ata Hashem Machnia Zedin. Blessed are you, Lord, humbler of the arrogant. And ours is Baruch Ata Hashem Shover Oivim Umachnia Zedim. So ours adds the word Shover Oivim, who breaks our enemies. Blessed are you, God, who breaks our enemies and humbles the arrogant.
So when Jesus' name is Jesus of Nazareth, is that a location?
Yeah, the city of
Nazareth.
Nazareth.
And is that where this Nazarene term comes from?
Well, it's
and then
right
gets applied
here.
More generally?
Yeah, it's right here where you can say, so it's, this is an explicit reference to Christians. Right? So,
I was just wondering about the etymology of that reference.
Yeah, from the city of Nazareth. So this is something like Nazirim or something like that. Okay, so this is quite an interesting text, because now we know that this community of Jews living in Palestine, that's what it was called at the time, this was just a normal part of their Amidah. They would pray this 3 times a day, every weekday.
Where does the traditional story that you described come from? Is it written in the Talmud?
Yeah, it's in the Talmud. Okay. Yeah, and we're going to see how we're going to break it down and I think read the Talmud in a way that actually makes sense. So if we're going to include the blessing of the heretics, we need to get rid of one of the other blessings, and so we do by combining them. And so that's the second to the last two. So Jerusalem and David. So here it says, have compassion, Lord our God, with your great compassion upon Israel, your people, and upon Jerusalem, your city, and upon Zion, the dwelling of your honor, and upon your temple, and upon your residence, and upon the royal house of David, your righteously anointed one. And Baruch Ata Hashem Elohei David Bonei Yerushalayim. Blessed are you, Lord, God of David, builder of Jerusalem. And what that does is it combines on page 40 of the weekday Siddur, the second and third paragraphs. The second paragraph on the page is V'lirushalayim ircha brachamim tashuv, right? So to Jerusalem, your city, return in mercy. And then the third paragraph on the page says, Et semach David avdecha merat tatzmiach. The sprout of David, your servant, quickly cause to sprout, right? So what this prayer has done is it's combined these two separate prayers into one. So we have covered all 19 of the themes that appear in the Amidah that we're used to, but we've done it in 18 blessings.
And is this how it appears in a traditional Ashkenazi Orthodox Siddur? Also?
One that's in our Siddur?
Not ours, but like an Orthodox Ashkenazi Siddur.
Yeah, well, within Sim Shalom is the same. We have the same 19 blessings.
Okay, thank you.
Word for word. All right, so what does this tell us? We've got in the land of Israel, 3 opening blessings: covenant with ancestors, power, and holiness. We've got the same 3 closing blessings, only here they number 16, 17, and 18. And then we've got 12 blessings in the middle. And so you can see we don't need to put an asterisk next to heretics, right? We combine Jerusalem and David into blessing number 14, right? And that's what the Jews of the land of Israel are using. Now, according to the Babylonian Talmud, and this is what we find in Seder Rav Amram Gaon, right? Remember, Rav Amram, he was the leader of the Babylonian community. He's the one who at the very beginning of this class, he's the one who writes the book, the first Siddur, that he sends to Jews in Spain who are asking how they're going to get to 100 blessings a day. What are the prayers that we need to say? And so he sends them. And so he sends the version that appears in the Babylonian Talmud, which makes sense because that's what he's got in front of him. So the 3 opening blessings, the 3 closing blessings, only this time the closing blessings are 17, 18, and 19, and then the 13 blessings in the middle, including heretics, with Jerusalem and David separated, right? Which is exactly what we have in our Siddur. This is what is in the Sephardic Siddur as well. These same 19 blessings. Now let's go back to looking at these rabbinic texts that we started with. Rabban Gamliel says, every day a man should pray the 18. Rabbi Yoshua says, an abstract of the 18. Rabbi Akiva says, if he knows it fluently, he prays the 18, and if not, an abstract of the 18. So what are they saying, right? Do they actually want you to say 18 blessings? Or maybe they want you to cover 18 themes, right? These are 18 things that need to be said every day in your Amidah. For Rabban Gamliel, he says you've got to cover each of the 18, right? So he's basically saying we need a separate bracha for each of them. Rabbi Yoshua says, that's not necessary, right? It's enough to just make a reference to these 18 points. So, and we have a version that goes back to the 2nd century of the Havinenu, which is the single bracha, which covers all 18 themes. And what is so fascinating is that every version has them in exactly the same order, right? So the version of, from the Geniza, it's got 18 blessings, but they're in the exact same order. The version in our Siddur, that's from Rav Amram, there it's 19 blessings, but it's in the exact same order. The Havinenu, right? The abstract of them, again, exact same order. So that this verb that we saw, we're gonna look at it again. Hisdir, to organize them, to order them, they mean it, right? We're placing them in a particular order. Well, that's got to be because we're telling a story, or we're trying to convey a certain message. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter what the order is. All right. And now look at Rabbi Eliezer. This is from the next Mishnah. We saw this at an earlier class. He says, If a person makes his Tefilah fixed, then his Tefilah is not supplication. Well, this perhaps is an objection. Maybe he's saying this concern with covering these 18 topics in exactly this order, you're missing the point of what Tefilah is supposed to be. It's got to be more spontaneous, right? So he doesn't think that you fulfill your obligation necessarily by doing what Rabban Gamliel says. He's more concerned with, let's say the spiritual aspect of what's taking place, right?
I think the order is off personally. But.
Well, maybe. Well, it depends what the story is.
Okay.
All right. Tosefta. What is the Tosefta? The Tosefta is coterminous with the Mishnah. Same time period, but it's not the Mishnah. There's many parallels. It's organized along the same topical structure, but it includes a lot of teachings that are not in the Mishnah. Sometimes a Braita that appears in the Talmud has a parallel to something that's in the Tosefta. I looked it up. The Braita of Shimon HaPakuli does not have a parallel, but this may sound a little familiar. Shmona Esrei she'amru chachamim keneged Shmona Esrei azkarot shebehavu l'Adonai b'nei Elim. So the 18 that the sages said correspond to the 18 mentionings of Havu l'Adonai b'nei Elim, right? So that's Psalm 29, right? We saw that earlier in the Gemara when they were trying to answer the question of 18, but you said 19, right? 19, but you said 18, right? V'kolel shel minim b'shel perushim, and a person can include the minim, so the blessing against the heretics, b'shel perushim, in the blessing for the perushim. So perushim are Pharisees. What's the blessing for the Pharisees? All right. So the blessing for the Pharisees is probably the blessing for what we call the tzaddikim and the chassidim, right? The righteous people and the pious people, right? The Pharisees, these are the proto-rabbis, or at least the people that the rabbis look to as their kind of spiritual and intellectual forebears. So so for the scholars, right? So we're going to ask God to shmeiss the heretics in the same prayer in which we ask God to bless the scholars. B'shel gerim b'shel zkenim, and for the converts in the blessing of the elders, okay? B'shel David b'Yerushalayim, and David in the blessing for Jerusalem, right? Well, isn't that interesting, right? They're saying you want to include David, you can do it in the blessing for Jerusalem. Well, that's exactly what we saw in that manuscript from the Cairo Geniza, that the community in Eretz Yisrael, is that they included David and Jerusalem in the same blessing. And if he said these by themselves and these by themselves, he's fulfilled his obligation. All right. So what does this suggest to us? It suggests that 18, maybe not necessarily, right? We've got these 18 themes, but by the end of the Tosefta, we're kind of loosey-goosey. You want to include these together, go ahead. If you want to separate them up, that's okay too. What's maybe more important is that we just hit the correct themes, not necessarily that we have the liturgy in this precise formation. And again, remember, there's nothing printed. It's all being done by memory. And we had that story of Shmuel HaKatan who forgot. He forgot the prayer of the heretics and just spent a couple hours trying to remember it, right? So this is what we saw. Now, we saw this already. 18, what do you mean 18? 19. And then we get Rabbi Levi, the blessing of the heretics. They instituted it in Yavne, right? So this is in the decade after the destruction of the temple. That's when they institute the blessing against the heretics. And then we have this discussion, well, what does it correspond to? Well, and then we have, maybe it's Psalm 29, which by the way, we just saw in the Tosefta. And then we have a couple other versions. But what's interesting about this 1819 bit This is in Babylonia. This is a discussion by sages in Babylonia, Amoraim, right? They are separate from the Mishnah and from the Tosefta by time and space. So this story about the institution of the blessing against the heretics in Yavna is being told in Babylonia, right? So the 19th blessing, or at least this story about a 19th blessing, exists in Babylonia. This passage does not appear in the Talmud of Eretz Yisrael, right? Only in the Talmud of Babylonia. So let's look at how does it continue? Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, now we've got a Braita, right? So what is a Braita? Braita is recorded in a Babylonian text, but is ostensibly a text from the land of Israel in the 2nd century, right? So this is our Shimon HaPakuli text. What does he do? Shimon HaPakuli arranged the 18 blessings before Rabban Gamliel in order in Yavna. Rabban Gamliel said to the sages, is there any person who knows to institute the blessing of the heretics? Shmuel HaKatan stood and instituted. The next year he forgot it and scrutinized it for 2 or 3 hours, and they didn't remove him. All right. Why didn't they remove him? Right. All right. Let's on. All right. So this Braita is ostensibly from the 2nd century in Israel, but recorded in the Babylonian Talmud. What number does not appear anywhere in that Braita?
18 or 19?
19.
19 does not appear anywhere in this Braita. So this is something that we sometimes forget. That the Babylonian Talmud is a synthesized document. We're bringing different materials together and putting them in order. Now, this passage comes after the discussion is introduced about the 19 blessings. But this doesn't say anything about 19 blessings. It talks about 18 blessings. And when they talk about instituting the blessing of the heretics, is this a 19th blessing? Or is it we're figuring out what one of the 18 blessings is?
No.
It's a little ambiguous, right? And now that we've got that Siddur from the land of Israel, it might cause us to look at this in a little bit of a different light. And then we get this discussion afterwards where they're trying to figure out about Shmuel HaKatan. Why didn't they get rid of him, right? Yeah, they have no idea. We just have this story, this Braita, but they don't know. So they have this, they're trying to justify why they didn't remove him. They're worried about sectarians, all of these things. But what do we know is that we do know that in the land of Israel, they had 18 blessings and Birkat HaMinim was one of them. All right, so now let's think about what the story is that is being told. We start with a blessing for knowledge, right? So these are certainly things that are important to the rabbi. So we start with knowledge. We need to learn. Knowledge leads to repentance, right? I can't start to think about fixing myself, about repairing my ways until I've laid a groundwork of knowledge. After repentance comes forgiveness. If I've been forgiven, that leads to my redemption. Okay. Redemption leads to healing, physical healing, right? We've healed the body. So what is the Birkat Hashanim, the blessing of the years? This is the healing of the land. Right. So remember, these prayers are being ordered, placed in this narrative right after the destruction of the first temple by the Romans. The land has been devastated, right? It is not very productive right now, right? There once were huge forests and basically through, all sorts of overuse of the land and war, the land is not productive anymore. So now we're talking about a physical healing of the land. What happens next? Gathering in of the exiles, right? You can't gather the exiles in to a land that cannot support them, right? So this is the correct order. Now we've got all these people. So what do we need to do? We need to restore the courts, right? So one of the things that the Romans did is they abolished the Sanhedrin, right? They took away the Jewish people's and specifically the rabbis' ability to to execute justice in the land of Israel. And the rabbis are constantly lamenting the hypocritical and corrupt Roman legal system, right? And so in contrast to the inspired Jewish legal system, at least as they describe it. All right. So what happens after we reinstitute the justice system? Well, that's when the heretics, the people who have basically been sinning, can be dealt with. And along with that, we can restore the righteous to their proper position in society. And so when all of that has happened, then we can talk about restoring Jerusalem, right? Because remember, we're in exile now. The temple's been destroyed, and the rabbis are no longer in Jerusalem. So this is all laying the groundwork for a rebuilding of Jerusalem. And then what happens then? Then we get the Messiah, and then we close it all out with a prayer with an appeal for God to hear our prayers. So what this story is telling is not a story of personal bakashot followed by national bakashot. This isn't even really bakashot. This is the story of redemption, right? We're talking about, when we're talking about knowledge, repentance, and forgiveness, we are talking about these on a national scale. The rabbis understand that this is the order that some sort of redemption is going to take place in. And it's happening, they come up with this at a time when there's lots of other groups around them that have lots of different beliefs. And some of those groups are extremely messianic in their beliefs or apocalyptic in their beliefs. We know because we've got their texts, right? We've got the Qumran groups, right? Which have this vision of this huge battle of, the sons of light against the sons of darkness, right? Or this Messiah is going to come in and change everything. Or you've got the Christians running around who are talking about the Messiah, having come. This is a very different vision. This is not Mashiach now, right? This is not the Messiah is going to come and everything's going to change. We are in this for the long haul, and a lot has to happen in order for, ultimately for this messianic age to be reintroduced, right? This is a much more of a historic vision. It's a political statement as well. That you remember, it was the rabbis. The story the rabbis tell about their survival of the destruction of the temple is that they essentially snuck out and made a deal with the Romans to, Yochanan ben Zakkai says, give me Yavna, right? We're going to reassemble in Yavna, and you do what you're going to do in the temple, right? We're going into exile, and we're going to create a way to live in the exile. And so when we think about this word of Siddur, of order, right? It's crucial that these blessings are recited in this particular order, because if they were done out of order, then the story wouldn't make sense as a story of redemption. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think with this explanation, all of the other pieces fit into place, right? You've got differences in different places, right? So we see in Babylonia, they have a 19th blessing because they've separated out David and Jerusalem. They didn't understand the context, though, that Rabban Gamliel was dealing with, and so they had to come up with a different story to explain what was going on. And so they came up with this idea of bakashot, but it's not really about bakashot. It's about it's a political and theological vision that the rabbis have put forth.
Mm-hmm. So, Rabbi, is this apocalypse, is this related to the last chapter of the Christian Bible?
Yeah, I mean, so that's an apocalyptic text, and there are Jewish apocalyptic texts as well. I mean, in our Bible, there's not a whole lot of them, because remember, it was the rabbis who are the ones who are canonizing the Bible, and they are deciding what's in and what's out, and they keep out certain Jewish texts that they could very well have included, right? They did not include any of the books of the Maccabees, which are included in the Catholic Bible, right? Because those are kind of apocalyptic. You see language of sons of light and sons of darkness in the books of the Maccabees. That the rabbis are not interested in quick fixes like that. They're kind of in it for the long haul. And I think that attitude has served us well. Anytime in our history that Jews have gotten especially messianic, fervently messianic, it's not ended well.
It's still amazing to me how this all got through without writing, how people learned all this.
Yeah.
It boggles my mind. How did they do that? I mean,
well, actually, we're obligated to teach this to our children from generation to generation.
That's right. But think about it. It was when it was first all this came to be, how I just, and everybody had to memorize everything. That's amazing.
Well, and so you can see in those earliest levels when there's a discussion in the Mishnah already about whether you need to say these 18 blessings as 18 separate blessings, or can you consolidate them into one paragraph, right? And they say, and Akiva comes in and he kind of resolves it and says, you know what? For the common people, you can consolidate it into one paragraph and that's just fine.
That's a lot to consolidate.
Right, but when it's a story like this, it's easier to memorize. So, you started out with, we're looking for the odd one out. We're looking for the imposter. Which one got added later? And I think we've come to the conclusion that no, it's a very cohesive whole. It tells a story. And the difference between 18 and 19 is just people taking a slightly different riff on whether they can bind something or break something out.
So you could do a flow chart here and then have images and then it will all come together.
Yeah.
If they didn't have charts.
So, and I want to give credit where credit is due. A lot of the material that I've been kind of preparing with is from, this series, the prayer book series. This edition is on the Amidah, edited by Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman. It's a really wonderful series. There's 10 volumes of it, and it has, as I often find in my own studies, is that I start with in one place and then it leads me to somewhere else, which leads me to somewhere else, and so I end up compiling things together. But there is a really wonderful article in the introduction called "How the Amidah Began," where he kind of presents this story, and I want to give credit where credit is due. We don't have this story right here of a vision of a rabbinic vision of redemption. This is speculation. We don't know this for certain. He gives credit to one of his teachers, a Rabbi Liebrick. So what I should Haomer b'Shem Omro mevi gula le'olam, right? It's the person who says it in the name of the one who taught it brings redemption to the world. So
Nice.
But I think it makes sense, and I think it ties together all of these different texts, and it helps us understand even in the Talmudic text, it helps us understand a little bit more about what's going on, right? We start with a bunch of disparate prayers. There's no uniformity in terms of what people are praying in the Second Temple era. And then at a certain point, the rabbis realize, you know what, we need to lock some things down or we're going to lose it all. And at the same time, they're not interested in this messianism because they've seen how that, flames out really quickly. And so they gather in a lot of prayers, many of which probably were already familiar to people, right? None of these themes are unique themes. Like all of these themes appear elsewhere in our prayers, right? These are kind of generic, universal themes, right? And what else? We need to compose one new one. Right? We saw the one new one they needed to compose, and they put that in there. And that issue about meaning, about sectarians, that's a particular issue for the rabbis. It crops up in other places in rabbinic writings as well. By the way, every group in the ancient world is concerned about heretics doing things, so it's not out of the ordinary. But yeah, so we see that initial effort has really stood the test of time. Now, I add one more piece, is that while the 18 or 19 themes, let's say, are fixed, the particular way that they are expressed are not necessarily fixed. So if you compared an Ashkenazi to a Sephardi Siddur, they would be different. Nowadays, all Ashkenazi Siddurim are going to be pretty much the same, but that's only because of the consolidation brought about by printing press and communications today. I read in the My People's Prayer Book that I guess a 14th century traveler who traveled all over the world and saw lots of different Jewish communities noted that the actual wording of the Amidah was different in every single community he went to. Right? But the order was the same. So.
Wow.
All right. Any other questions or comments? I saw, Susan, you asked how to spell Zunz. Good question. Z-U-N-Z.
A name I'd never heard.
Yeah. One of the great kind of the early kind of the 19th century scholars that kind of led to this awakening, this historical awakening of Jews.